Well, consumers have long had questions about their food, and rightly so. Everything from where it comes from to who's producing it and how. But in recent years, that healthy curiosity has grown into a rising skepticism, often fueled by misinformation. It's an environment bombarded with contradictions, and one our next guest knows all too well. Charlie Arnot is the director of the Center for Food Integrity and believes a sustainable food system must be ethically grounded, scientifically verified, and economically viable. And I was able to visit with him when he spoke at Oklahoma State University.
Well, the social license for agriculture is truly at risk today, as we see more brands and more regulations and more legislation being passed to restrict what agriculture can do. And really those in the food system, the branded food companies and other brands, really coming back to agriculture and saying, we don't want that process, we don't want that ingredient, we don't want that product as part of our supply chain, make it go away. So in order to earn and maintain that level of social license and permission to operate, we have to be more engaged in this conversation. If we choose to do nothing, then we abdicate any opportunity to influence that outcome. We leave that outcome to others. And I don't think that's what agriculture wants to do. Agriculture tends to be driven by people who are self-actualizing, independent, people who are driven to success. But part of that success today is dependent on their ability to work hard to earn consumer trust.
So Charlie, how did we get here where big ag is on the defensive, whether rightly or wrongly?
No, it's a great question. We've actually done quite a bit of research on that, and believe it or not, it actually takes us all the way back to 1968. Coming out of World War II, we had fairly broad social consensus and a lot of optimism about where we were heading as a country. We began to see that erode in the 1960s, and 68 was really a watershed year. We lost both Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Martin Luther King Jr. to assassinations in 1968. You had the Democratic National Convention where protesters were clashing with police and with troops. The Vietnam War was in full bloom, as was opposition to the war. You follow that up with the Kent State shootings, and then you've got the Watergate break-in, which leads to the resignation of our first president. Then Iran-Contra, 3 Mile Island, Exxon Valdez. We have a second president who's impeached but not convicted. The subprime mortgage collapse, on and on and on. The violations of public trust by institutions like government, military, education, business, etc., over the last 45 years have been big enough and visible enough that we've been taught as a culture not to trust institutions. At the same time, we've seen phenomenal improvements in food and agriculture, which have allowed food to become more profitable, to become more affordable, to become more available, and to become more safe than ever before. But it's also caused consolidation and integration, which now causes the public to think about food as an institution. And as such, since we've been taught to be skeptical about whether or not institutions are worthy of trust, we're now much more skeptical about whether or not the food system is worthy of trust. So it's a great frustration for those in ag and food because they're good people doing great work, trying to make sure we all have safe, nutritious, affordable food, and yet there's this growing erosion of trust in who they are and what they do.
Well, it sounds like on one side, when we're talking about agriculture, they're trying to do the very best that they can. The other side, consumers want the very best food that we can. Why is there this disconnect then?
Well, it's a critical disconnect, and it's really based on our misunderstanding of how best to communicate. Historically, agriculture has always viewed the challenge with public acceptance as an information deficit problem. The public just didn't have enough facts, they didn't have enough data. If we can give them enough data, if we can give them enough facts, they'll come to our side of the argument, they'll be more supportive. What we've learned through our peer-reviewed and published research is that connecting on values is 3 to 5 times more important than giving data in building trust. So it really means we have to rethink how we're communicating and embrace consumer skepticism, make sure they understand we appreciate and we value their concerns, that we share the same concerns, and that here's the information that can prove what we're doing is actually aligned with their interest. So for example, if someone comes and says, you know, I'm really uncomfortable about GM food, it really makes me uncomfortable. Rather than going into a scientific explanation about why GM is important and safe, embrace the fact that what you're hearing is they're concerned about food safety. They're concerned about whether or not they're doing the right thing when it comes to feeding their family. We're all concerned about that. We're concerned about doing the right thing to feed our family. We're concerned about food safety. So it gives us the opportunity to connect. And rather than giving them a lot of facts, we can say, you know, what I hear you say is you're really concerned about making sure the food you feed your family is safe and it's the right thing to do. And I respect that because I care about that too. In fact, that's part of the reason that we're using the technology that we use today. It allows us to produce safer food, to use fewer natural resources, and to give you and your family the choices and options to buy what's right for you at the supermarket.
So as we change our messaging, do you think consumers can gain more confidence in our food supply?
I think they can and they will. I think one of the challenges is we have to adopt a different definition of success. Farmers are so incredibly resourceful and they do such a great job solving problems. But the cultural expectation within farming is we can solve the problem in the next cycle of production. So if I've got a crop problem, I can change my crop protection chemical program. If I've got a livestock problem, I can get some new animal health products or change genetics. And by gosh, by the time I get through that next cycle of production, that problem is solved. It took us 45 years to get to where we are today with the erosion of public trust. We're not going to solve this in the next cycle of production. It's going to take some time. So we really need a 20-year vision and a 20-month action plan. So we're constantly engaged, we're committed to being involved, but we're not going to solve this in the short term. We need everybody in agriculture and the food system to really be committed to engaging with consumers and participating in this process over time.
Mm-hmm. What role does transparency come in here, where you open the doors and say, we're not ashamed of anything that we're doing, here's how it's done, and this is why we do it?
Increasing transparency is without question the single most important thing we can do to increase trust, without doubt. Our recent research has demonstrated that, and agriculture has this conflicted relationship with transparency where we tell people we have nothing to hide, but yet it's none of your business. And we've got to move beyond that. We've got to move beyond that expectation where people don't have a right to know what's going on our farms. When we operate in an environment where everybody who has a cell phone can be a cinematographer, we pretty much have to assume somebody's watching everything we do all the time and make sure we're okay with that we're operating our farms and our operations in such a way that if someone is there taking a picture or getting an image, we're comfortable with being able to explain what we're doing, why we're doing it, why it's in the best interest of animals or the environment, and ultimately why it's in the best interest of consumers.
Mm-hmm. What about those groups that may purposely be spreading disinformation? How do we deal with someone that, you know, the old saying that a lie can travel 1,000 miles while the truth is still getting its boots on? How do we deal with that?
Well, one of the things that we have to do is we have to be much more willing to be involved in the public conversation. Whether it's digitally, in person, in the media, whatever it happens to be, we have to be willing to be involved in that conversation. But rather than attacking our attackers, we need to co-opt the high ground. We need to embrace the ethical high ground and help people understand we share their concern about making sure animals are well cared for, that the environment is protected, that safe food is being produced. So when someone comes forward and says, there was this horrible undercover video, isn't that terrible? Rather than attacking the organization that produced the video, a more productive response would be, you know, what I saw in that video was very disturbing. And it's completely inconsistent with the standards that those in agriculture have established for animal care. We look forward to working with that farmer to better understand what happened and to raise up again his production to the standards we've established for all of us in agriculture. So reassure the public that what we saw was as unacceptable to us as it was to them, and then help them understand what we're doing to make sure we correct that situation.
What happens when we see a food scare? Because across all industries, not just agriculture, mistakes can happen. Some of them completely accidental. What do we do then?
We've got to also embrace the fact that improvements can and should be made. We need to embrace consumer skepticism, and rather than again being defensive, help them understand why that particular scare exists, what they can do to avoid any potential problems, and then provide the reassurance that those are exceptions, not the rule. But to simply dismiss it undermines our credibility and undermines consumer trust. Because if a consumer is actually concerned about something, they've seen something that raises their level of concern, we have to be willing to embrace the concern, but we don't have to validate misinformation. So I can embrace your concern about animal care or about food safety without validating the misinformation that led to that concern.
And I do want to ask a final question about the communication part and just how tenuous it can be if people don't trust the information they're given. And that, again, goes across industry. Agriculture's not alone here, are they?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. People are much more skeptical about information than they've ever been before. And that's why simply delivering science in and of itself is not going to be sufficient. If I can't help you understand that I embrace your concerns, I understand your concerns, and I share your concerns, then the information I share with you is not likely to be well received. One of the things that we have to understand is really kind of the communication equation. Science tells us if we can do something, society tells us whether or not we should do something. We're very good at answering the can question. We've got great science in agriculture, but we have to improve our ability to answer the should question. And the should question is based on helping the public understand that what we're doing is the best for animals, it's good for the environment, and it's really in the best interest of consumers and society. That's where we need to focus if we want to restore trust.
All right, Charlie Arnot, thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity.
Well, the Center for Food Integrity is a not-for-profit organization whose members and project partners represent a diversity of today's food system, from farmers, ranchers, and food companies to universities and non-governmental organizations, as well as restaurants, retailers, and food processors.